Hello everyone, welcome back to the course on Health Humanities, Indian and Western Medical Knowledge Traditions. This is lecture number 45 on Black women's health and medical practices. In this lecture, I will talk about how Black women define Western medical practices and they try to have their indigenous approach to their health and healing. In this lecture, I will talk about the concerns of Black women's health and medical apartheid. I will talk about the historical and social context of Black women's health. This I will discuss with Tony Cade Bambaraz, the Salt Eaters, and Octavia Butler's the novel Fledging. I'll also make a comparative analysis of these two novels and then find out how they assert their healthcare concerns. This in these two novels, the concerns of healthcare of Black women is to look at and examine the Western medical practices and how they are segregating, how they are imposing authority, and how Black women become the object of their study, the object of their research, and that endangers their life and their health. It is about how the Western medical practices, experimentation, and research has led to the crisis of health in the life of Black women. When we think about the health of Black women, it is shaped by racism, sexism, classism, and medical neglect. Because when the Western people were treating the Black woman, then they looked down the Black woman, considered them as subhuman. They do not consider them equal to the white people. They also faced sexist discriminations. They faced class discriminations, and hence they were not part of the Western medical practices. Harriet Washington writes in her book Medical Apartheid: The Dark History of Medical Experimentation on Black Americans from Colonial Times to the Present. In this book, she says that no other group deeply distrusts the American medical system, especially medical research, more than the blacks. So when we think about the American medical system, American medical research, the black people had a deep distrust, deep doubt about these practices. The reason was that when the vaccines were in their beginning phase, then the trials were made on the Black woman. It has no surety about what impact it will have. So Black women became the source of their object for experimentation. This has led to the distrust and doubt, suspicion in the Western medical practices. So in this presentation, I'll explore how literature engages with these dynamics, how literature engages with this distrust, how literature provides an alternative medical system through Tony Cade Bambaraz' The Salt Eater, published in 1980, and Octavia Butler's Fledging. When we think about the medical approach which is prevalent in the South African countries, then we find what Harriet Washington has to say. She says that the medical practice has, in the case of Africa, has a racist and elitist approach, because the medicines which has undergone trials, then they were induced in the white people, but those under trial medicines were given to the black people, and those who are rich, those who are from the higher social class, they had access to the trialed medical practices, medical vaccines. And So this racist and elitist approach was creating a view of the birth controls as a means of solving social problems. But the problem was different because when the birth control medicines, birth control uh, medical practices were developed, then they were experimented upon the black woman. And as Washington observes, that researchers did introduce racial bias by overwhelmingly apportioning the potential health risk of experimental birth control technology to women of color. The pill, Norplant, and the Depo-Provera sort were first tested in Mexico, Africa, Brazil, Puerto Rico, and India. Once approved, they were administered to large number of women and girls in US venues that are disproportionately and usually overwhelmingly African American and Hispanic. So what Harriet Washington says, that when we think about birth control pills and the testing and trials were done on the black people, on the Mexican people, African people, I mean black woman, Mexican woman, African woman, Indian woman, and many other women from the uh, not so-called Western countries, and it has brought a potential health risk because this experimentation and birth control technologies were not in their complete researched form. Hence, it has led to a different kind of health crisis for the black woman. When we look at the historical and social context of the health of black people and particularly black women, then we find that black women were denied the healthcare opportunities. They were exploited and they have met forceful sterilization, including there was a case of Tuskegee study where around 400 African male people have been studied, and then there was a study of J. Marion Sims experiments. So all these were basically uh, exploitative and experimental. Further, when we think about the condition of maternal mortality and mental health of women, we find that it has a systematic bias and disparities because the cases of maternal mortality are very high in black women compared to the white woman, and hence a black feminist calls for holistic community-centered care. They want that the medical systems, medical practices should be available to every woman, irrespective of their color, irrespective of their race. It should be holistic, and there should be community-centered care for black women. Let us think about these two novels. To begin with, Tony Said Bambara, The Salt Eater. The novel is set in a southern black community, and it focuses on a character called Velma, who is a political activist, but she has attempted suicide by slitting her veins in the hand. And post suicidal catatonic, Velma Henry goes to the what you call to a clinic, and she is sitting in the on a stool for a long time in the main room, and she finds the kind of expressions people are having on her, the way people are gazing at her. And this novel explores her mental crisis, and it rejects the Western medical healing practices, rather prefers traditional methods. When she meets her doctor, Minnie Ransom, who is a spiritual healer, and she is famous as fabled healer of the district. She provides her an alternative approach to care. She is not providing her the Western medical care, rather, she is providing an alternative approach. And what is this alternative approach? The doctor Minnie Ransom asks, "Are you sure, sweetheart, that you want to be well? And what's your story?" The question, like, what is your story, is very important. This brings what Rita Saron has called the narrative medicine, or what Arthur Frank calls the storytelling, the wounded storytelling. So we find that we have an alternative mode, what you call the narrative medical practice in this novel. And Minnie tries to actually provide this alternative narrative medicine to Velma and support her mental health, make her free from her suicidal tendencies. So she cures her through personal stories. She tries to know her problems, she listens her, and then tries to diagnose like what she is having. Further, this novel critiques Western medical failures to address Black women's trauma, and then storytelling and listening becomes how women can support each other and how they can get some kind of mental consolation. The key themes in the Salt Eaters are that healing also is a political act because health is linked with activism and social stress. And Velma is actually associated with activism. And once like she is part of the activism, she also finds some kind of mental peace. And when her activism fails, it creates some kind of social stress. Further, the health of women are also associated with their race, gender, labor, and it causes trauma and disrupts their health. The alternative medical practice which this novel offers are African spiritual healing practices. So one is like turning to narrative, turning to storytelling, and then next is turning to spiritual healing practices. It also talks about community care, emphasizing collective rather than individual healing. So in this way, we find that this novel, The Salt Eaters, are providing a very different approach to the medical healing. It talks about the person's health. It have a kind of a dialogue with the patient, like, do you want to be really well? What is your story? This is very significant. And then talks about like how narrative, how storytelling, how spiritual healing, and how collective approach can heal a person's health. When we go to the next novel, Octavia Butler's Fledgling, we find that Butler has a concern about sociobiology, and his sociobiological concern is not only as a means of the social determinants of health, but it infuses social relations. So Butler is trying to uh, narrate that sociobiology is very important because it is not only the social determinants of the health, but it is part of one's health. So the novel Fledgling incorporates the sociobiological assumptions which combines with medical sciences and daily practices of people. So this novel Fledgling incorporates the sociological, biological, and medical practices, and then considers the day-to-day life of people to treat them, to cure them. This novel makes a parallel world of vampires, and one of them is like a new race called Ina. And this like parallel world of vampire is different from the human race. And the imagined and what you call the narrative world of empire, which is represented by Ina, is superior to the human beings. Human beings are seen as inferior to the Ina race. And one of the vampires. Her name is Sori Matthew. She survived once the assault because people thought that she is a vampire and she has been attacked. So this text actually explores the biopolitics, identity concerns, and interdependence through speculative fictions, through science fiction. It talks about how the survival of Sori reflects the medical experimentation and race, how it tries to create the higher human beings, how it tries to create maybe what Nietzsche has called Superman, or what in case of Jad Bernard Shaw is called life force. So the fictional creation of Ina is trying to bring a new race which is superior, which is powerful, and which is having a longer duration of life. However, it raises ethical issues around health, consent, and power. That when these vampires are made, what about their consent, and what about how they would survive, and how they will get their acceptance in the society? The key concerns of fledglings are that the story of Saudi reflects medical experimentation on black bodies. It talks about how black bodies have been part of experimentation, and once this experimentation goes wrong, then they can actually get transformed into vampires. Further, when we think about the bodily autonomy, it raises complex ethical concerns around feeding and survival. Further, we have the issues of regeneration and resilience, both in literal as well as in metaphorical healing powers. What happens like when these new generations and this recreation of race meet with human being, how they communicate, how they interact, what kind of resilience they are having, and this leads to further problems. When we compare these two novels, we find that these novels, for example, Salt Eaters, talks about communal and spiritual healing, while Fledgling talks about biological and genetic healing. In the case of Salt Eater, the focus is on activism and burnouts. For healing, in the case of Fledgling, the focus is on race science and survival. When we think about the medical institutions, uh, the Salt Eater critiques the Western medical institutions, and the other novel, Fledgling, it reimagines through science fiction. When we look about the doctors, the patients, we find that the doctors in Salt Eaters are spiritual healers, and people survive and get cured through narratives, through spirituality, through storytelling. In the case of Fledgling, the doctors are genetically advanced uh, doctors, and the patients are also genetically advanced. So this brings a kind of difference which we can find out in these two novels. The broader implications of these two novels are that health is embodied in political systems, which also results in oppression and resistance. These novels challenge traditional medicine and healing paradigms. Rather, they try to find out an alternative medical practices and an alternative healing paradigms. Literature offers a reimagined models for care and justice for black women and challenges the Western medical models. So, to conclude, both novels critique dominant narratives of health and healing, which are imported from the Western countries. Further, both novels provide Black feminist visions centered around autonomy, spirituality, science, and solidarity. These novels assert that and address the full spectrum of human health concerns and human experiences of health and how they can be cured and treated in the alternative medical practices. Thank you.